Blood is supposed to be thicker than water. But in the savage hierarchy of Lycan aristocracy, blood is just another commodity on the auction block. Cora Sterling was bartered away for a silver mine and a council seat. Her own sisters, consumed by greed, rotted through with jealousy, put their signatures on the contract that condemned her, shipped her off to the most vicious alpha in the Northern Territories. In their minds, they were taking out the trash, discarding the family runt, tossing a useless burden into the dark to be forgotten. What none of them understood, what no living soul on this earth suspected, was that the quiet, shattered girl they sold for scraps was fated to wear the crown. She was the Alpha King's true mate. The Sterling estate had once been the proud, beating heart of the Silver Pines pack, nestled deep in the forests of Oregon. Now it was rotting from the inside out. Grand mahogany walls blistered and peeled, the pack treasury bone dry, every last coin spent, and Silas Sterling had become a ghost haunting his own house. A slow, wasting illness had gutted his authority, hollowed him out. Real power had migrated, quietly, completely, into the manicured and merciless hands of his two eldest daughters, Beatrice and Fiona. Beatrice was tall, ice-blonde hair, a heart colder than anything winter ever produced. She paced the study like a caged predator. Fiona, younger, equally poisonous, perched on the edge of their father's desk, dragging a file across her nails with the detachment of someone who found the collapse of her own bloodline profoundly boring. "The debt is due," Beatrice said. Her voice cut through the thick, dust-choked air like a blade through gauze. "Dominic Blackwood has sent his final warning, midnight tomorrow. He either has his $2 million in restitution for the border skirmishes, or his enforcers cross our southern ridge and butcher every warrior we have left." Silas coughed into a linen handkerchief. A wet, rattling sound from deep inside a chest that had no fight remaining. "We cannot pay him, Beatrice. You know the accounts are empty. Our only option is to surrender the eastern logging territories. We lose our last source of income." Fiona looked up from her nails and scoffed. "Don't be pathetic. There's another way. Dominic doesn't only want land, he wants submission. He wants a trophy, proof that he brought the noble Sterlings to their knees." "What are you suggesting?" Silas's voice shook. Beatrice stopped mid-stride. She locked eyes with Fiona. A look passed between them. Dark, rehearsed, already decided. _____, quote, _5, ____. On the other side of the heavy oak doors, 20-year-old Cora Sterling went rigid. She stood there holding a tray of bitter herbal tea meant for her father. Her worn cotton dress hung loose, practically swallowing her thin frame. Cora was the anomaly of the Sterling bloodline, 20 years old, and she still hadn't shifted into her wolf. Her sisters never let her forget it. They called her defective, an omega born into an alpha's house by some cosmic mistake. They treated her worse than hired help, made her scrub floors, serve their meals on her knees, while they paraded through the estate in designer gowns purchased on credit they couldn't repay. "Cora," Silas rasped. Genuine shock cracked through his lethargy. "Your own sister." "She is a Sterling. She is blood. She is a parasite," Beatrice hissed, both palms slamming flat against the desk. "She hasn't shifted. She smells human. She acts human. She brings nothing to this family but shame." Blackwood included a secondary term in his letter. If we cannot deliver the gold, he will accept a Sterling daughter as collateral, an indentured omega bound to his pack. He meant Fiona or me, obviously, to force a political marriage. But the contract only specifies a daughter of the Sterling bloodline. "He will kill her," Silas whispered. His eyes fell closed. Dominic Blackwood is a monster. His pack, the Iron Fang, is a slaughterhouse. "Better her than us," Fiona added, sliding off the desk. "Think about it, father. We send Cora, the debt vanishes. Silver Pines survives. Beatrice and I lock down proper mates from wealthy packs in California. We rebuild. If you refuse, Blackwood slaughters every last one of us. What is one defective girl weighed against the survival of an entire pack? Behind the door, a single tear slid down Cora's cheek, landing without a sound on the wooden tray. She waited for her father to fight. She waited for the alpha of Silver Pines to rise, to snarl, to defend his youngest blood. What came instead was silence. Long, agonizing, final. Silas whispered, his voice shattered, hollow. Cora did not scream. She did not throw the door open and beg. Years of emotional abuse had carved that instinct out of her. Pleading with her family was like howling into dead air. Nothing came back. Numbly, she placed the tray on a side table, turned, fled down the grand staircase toward the servants' quarters. She had to pack. She had to run. But Beatrice was always one step ahead. By the time Cora reached her cramped attic room, the heavy rhythm of combat boots was already climbing the stairs. 3 enforcers from the Sterling Guard filled her doorway, broad, armed, expressionless, men who had known her since she was an infant. Their faces were stone, every trace of pity scraped clean. "Sorry, Miss Cora," the lead enforcer muttered. Harrison, scarred jaw. Wolf eyes that wouldn't meet hers. Cora's voice came out in a whisper as she retreated until her spine pressed flat against the cold glass of her single window. "You know what Blackwood does to his captives. You can't let them do this to me." Harrison turned his face away, signaled the other two. They seized Cora by both arms and hauled her, kicking, twisting, fighting, from the room. Out through the back door of the estate. The gravel bit into her bare feet, tearing skin with every step she was dragged. Waiting by a convoy of black armored SUVs, her sisters. Beatrice wore a smile that could curdle milk. Fiona clutched a velvet folder. Inside it, the signed contract. The lead SUV's door swung open, and Dominic Blackwood stepped out. Massive, built like a fortified wall. A jagged scar carved a river from his temple to his jawline. His eyes, cold, flat, the color of dead ash, locked onto Cora as the enforcers hurled her into the dirt at his feet. __quote_20__. Dominic sneered. He nudged Cora's trembling shoulder with the steel toe of his boot. Then he looked up at Beatrice, and his expression curdled into disgust. "She looks half-starved. I smell no wolf on her. Did you try to cheat me?" "She is a sterling, Alpha Blackwood," Beatrice replied, voice smooth as polished glass. "Silas's youngest daughter. The contract required a blood daughter, nothing more. She will serve your pack as an omega, scrubbing your floors, plating your meals. A living, breathing reminder to your people that the Sterlings kneel before the Iron Fang." Dominic's mouth stretched into a slow, cruel grin. He understood precisely the humiliation baked into this offering. __quote_24__. He reached down, grabbed Cora by the hair, yanked her upright. She cried out, sharp, involuntary, but the sound didn't register on his face. He flung her toward his men like discarded cargo. "Throw her in the back with the freight. If she tries to run, break her legs." The SUV doors slammed shut. Darkness swallowed Cora whole. Through the tinted glass, she caught one final image. Beatrice and Fiona turning their backs, drifting toward their rotting mansion. They had sold their own blood for a few more months of hollow luxury, and they never once looked back. The Iron Fang compound in Montana was not a pack settlement, it was a military fortress. High steel fences crowned with razor wire enclosed a brutalist wasteland of concrete, refinery smog, and perpetual gloom. This was Cora's new cage. 8 months of it stretching ahead like a sentence with no appeal. Dominic Blackwood wasted nothing, least of all time. The moment she arrived, her family name was stripped away. They handed her a coarse grey uniform, scratchy against her skin, the kind reserved for the lowest-ranking Omegas. Then they delivered her to Greta. The head of domestic staff was a vicious, older woman who wore cruelty like a uniform of her own. She took enormous, visible pleasure in grinding the former princess into dust. 4 in the morning, every single day. Cora's hands, once soft, became landscapes of suffering. Calluses, burns from industrial stoves, chemical scars etched by harsh cleaning solvents. She scrubbed the massive stone floors of the main hall on her knees. She prepared meals for hundreds of ravenous warriors who never thanked her, never saw her. And she absorbed constant abuse, physical, verbal, relentless, from pack members who delighted in kicking a fallen sterling. She survived by disappearing inside herself. In the freezing hours past midnight, curled on a thin mattress in the damp basement she shared with 4 other Omegas, something strange stirred. A vibrating warmth bloomed deep within her chest. Not pain, not fear, something she had never once felt back at the Sterling estate. The Iron Fang territory was brutal beyond measure, but that brutality was doing something her family's toxicity never could. It was waking something dormant. Her wolf. Suppressed for 20 years under the poisonous weight of silver pines, that creature was clawing toward the surface. Cora began hearing a voice in her mind, low, melodic, humming with the patience of a predator who knows the kill will come. Quote 26, it whispered. Quote 27. The grinding routine of the Iron Fang compound shattered one evening in late October. Panic ripped through the pack like wildfire. Cora was on her hands and knees in the grand dining hall, polishing the heavy oak legs of the Alpha's table, when Dominic's voice tore through the room. Quote 28. He roared, pacing frantically. Quote 29. Cora's rag hovered over the wood, her hand went still. The Alpha King. Caspian Reed of the Royal Obsidian Court, a name that hovered somewhere between legend and myth. He had ruled the entire North American lichen population for over a century. Ruthless toward corrupt alphas, an unmatched warrior who had single-handedly ended the lichen vampire border wars decades before anyone in this room had drawn breath. But none of that was the most famous thing about King Caspian. The most famous thing was his curse. For 100 years, the Alpha King had searched for his true mate. Every high-born female presented to him, rejected, one after another after another. His patience was wearing thin. The entire continent knew it. And a king without a mate was not merely lonely. He was volatile. He was dangerous. He was a force no one could predict. 3 days won't cover the rot, Garrett muttered, his gaze darting across the compound. We cover what we can, Dominic snapped. Dress the women in silk, scrub the training grounds until the stone forgets the blood, and perform loyalty like our lives depend on it, because they do. If King Caspian finds even one reason to put my head on a spike, he will take it. The Omegas get locked in the cellars before the royal banquet begins. I won't have the king's stomach turned by the sight of starving runts crawling underfoot. Then Dominic's eyes dropped and fixed on Cora beneath the table. He crossed the room in 3 strides. His fist closed around the collar of her uniform and dragged her out like a stray animal. __quote _33 __. Dominic hissed. His breath hit her face, sour, rancid. Warm, Cora whispered. Her eyes never lifted from the floor. He released her like something discarded. She hit the ground and scrambled back toward her bucket as Dominic wheeled on Garrett, already barking fresh orders. Cora plunged her rag into the soapy water and froze. Something strange moved through her body. Heat flooded her skin without warning, intense, immediate. A blade of pain shot up from the base of her spine. Her 21st birthday fell exactly 3 days from now, the age when a lichen's scent fully ripens, when the true mate bond unlocks and broadcasts itself to the world. For the next 48 hours, the Iron Fang compound became a hurricane of scrubbing, polishing, and barely controlled panic. Cora worked past the edge of exhaustion. They had her hauling crates of wine and slabs of cured meat from the deep storage units, loads meant for wolves twice her size. And with every passing hour, the fire inside her body climbed higher. Fever settled behind her eyes. Her vision stuttered, human sight dissolving into the sharper, high-contrast edges of a wolf's perception, then back again, then shifting once more. __quote _36 __. The voice in her mind rang louder now, clearer. It was no longer just her wolf speaking. It felt like gravity itself had changed direction, a magnetic pull in her blood, dragging her attention south, toward the road. On the afternoon of the third day, the atmosphere over the territory shifted. The perpetual smog that choked Iron Fang thinned and then broke apart, shoved aside by a pressure rolling down from the mountains, heavy, suffocating, absolute, the commanding aura of the Alpha King. Lower-ranking wolves crumpled to their knees, lungs seized, breathing became a conscious act. Greta found Cora slumped against the kitchen wall, sweat soaking through her uniform. Quote 37. Greta seized her and shoved her toward the heavy iron door that opened onto the subterranean root cellars. Quote 38. Cora had no strength left to resist. She staggered down the stone steps into absolute blackness. The iron door crashed shut above her. Then, the decisive clack of a heavy padlock. Darkness swallowed her whole. The air down here was freezing, damp, thick with the smell of rotting potatoes and cured meat hanging from hooks she couldn't see. She collapsed onto the dirt floor and curled into herself as agony ripped through her muscles, the first tremors of a shift her body had never attempted. She was going to transform for the first time, alone, in the dark, locked in a cage beneath the feet of her enemies. Above her, muffled but unmistakable, heavy tires rolling over gravel, and the roaring cheers of the Iron Fang pack as their king arrived. King Caspian Reed stepped from his armored Bentley, and the courtyard of the Iron Fang compound went dead. Not quiet, dead. Every wolf mid-bow, every guard mid-breath, every blade of grass frozen, as though the earth itself understood what had just arrived. Even the wind stopped. Caspian stood 6 feet 4 inches of controlled annihilation, shoulders broad enough to block a doorway, hair black as a moonless sky, and those eyes, violet, unnatural, bright enough to burn, swept across the kneeling pack the way a predator surveys prey it hasn't decided to kill yet. His tailored black suit moved like a second skin over the coiled, lethal architecture beneath it. Nothing about him invited warmth. Everything about him promised consequence. Beside him, Gideon, his beta, his shadow, his closest friend, scanned the perimeter with the quiet efficiency of a man who catalogued exits before he catalogued faces. Caspian's voice landed like a stone dropped into still water, smooth, deep, carrying a weight of command so absolute that Dominic's forehead dipped closer to the cobblestones before he could stop it. __quote _40 __. Dominic scrambled upright. He plastered on a smile, fawning, desperate, grotesque, against the ruin of his scarred face. Quote 41. Caspian did not smile. He stepped forward. His boots struck stone like a judge's gavel, sharp, deliberate, final. He inhaled once, deep, and his nose wrinkled, the faintest curl of disgust. Your pack smells of fear and cheap iron, Dominic. Let us hope your banquet is more palatable than your hospitality. The royal tour that followed was a slow-motion execution, bloodless, wordless, and devastating. Caspian missed nothing. His violet gaze found the hastily scrubbed bloodstains near the training pits, found the bruised faces of lower-ranking wolves that Dominic hadn't hidden fast enough, found the trembling hands, the flinching eyes, the truth that no amount of fresh paint and forced smiles could bury. Caspian said nothing about any of it. and his silence was infinitely worse than accusation. By the time the evening banquet filled the grand hall with candlelight and forced laughter, Dominic was drenched in his own sweat. He had seated Caspian at the head of the massive table, surrounded him with the wealthiest females, the most beautiful, including his own sister, Sylvia, a vain creature who draped herself across the king's chair like silk over a blade, oblivious to the danger. Caspian sat rigid, a glass of dark red wine untouched in his hand. He ignored Sylvia's honeyed attempts at conversation the way stone ignores rain. He was exhausted. 100 years of this. 100 years of wandering through territories and throne rooms, searching faces, inhaling the scents of millions of females, and finding what? Nothing. Not once. Not a flicker. Not a whisper from his wolf that said, her. The emptiness in his chest had stopped aching decades ago. It had calcified, hardened into something cold and dense and sharp, a rage so deep it had become architecture, load-bearing. Remove it, and everything collapses. His inner wolf, a massive black beast that existed in legend before it existed in flesh, paced behind his ribs, clawing, snarling, demanding a mate that Caspian had begun to believe the world had never made. ___quote _43 ___. Sylvia purred, leaning close. Her perfume hit him like a chemical weapon, thick, cloying, suffocating. __quote _44 ___. Caspian turned his head, slowly, the way a wolf turns towards something it hasn't yet decided is food or nuisance. Those violet eyes settled on her. The temperature in the grand hall dropped. 10 degrees, maybe more. Every candle flame seemed to shrink. Sylvia's throat bobbed. Her body obeyed before her mind caught up. She shrank backward, instinct overriding vanity. Quote 45, Caspian said, softly, almost tenderly, the way one might whisper a lullaby or a death sentence. __quote _46 __. Sylvia went bone white. She scrambled backward so violently her chair nearly toppled. The grand hall didn't just go silent, it went airless. Dozens of wolves forgot how to breathe. Dominic choked on his drink. Wine dribbled down his chin. His eyes bulged with raw animal terror. Caspian stood. The claustrophobia hit him like a wall. The heat, the perfume, the desperate performance of loyalty from wolves who would betray him for a scrap of power. He needed air. Needed distance from every sycophantic smile in this room. He placed both hands on the table to excuse himself, and then something happened. A thread of frozen air slithered beneath the kitchen doors, and riding that current, a scent. Caspian went rigid. His heart, which had kept its bored, mechanical rhythm for 100 years, detonated against his ribcage like a warhammer striking an anvil. The scent was faint, buried under layers of charred meat, cheap wine, and Sylvia's cloying perfume. But it was unmistakable, and it was devastating. Golden freer in full bloom, wild honey, the sharp electric bite of a thunderstorm cracking over mountain peaks. Nothing in his century of existence had come close. His inner wolf, silent, sulking, indifferent just a heartbeat ago, erupted. It hurled itself against the walls of his consciousness with a violence that turned Caspian's eyes incandescent purple. One word detonated through his skull. It didn't just echo. It vibrated through marrow and sinew. Gideon caught the shift instantly. The locked posture, the blazing eyes. His hand fell to the silver blade at his hip before thought could catch up. __quote _47 __, no answer. Caspian launched himself over the grand table. Porcelain shattered, crystal goblets exploded against stone, iron-fang wolves shrieked and crushed themselves against the walls as the Alpha King carved a straight line toward the kitchen entrance. Dominic scrambled after him, face drained of every shade of color. __quote _48, ___. Caspian never slowed. His shoulder hit the swinging doors like a battering ram. Hinges screamed, wood splintered. The doors didn't swing, they flew. Kitchen staff dropped pots, pans, knives, anything in their hands as the towering king invaded their space. He closed his eyes, drew a long, shuddering breath. The scent was thicker here, denser. It coiled around every nerve ending and pulled him forward like a marionette jerked by invisible thread. He tracked it with predatory exactness, past the cowering staff, past the roaring heat of industrial ovens. He stopped at the back of the pantry. A heavy iron door was set into the floor. A thick steel padlock sealed it shut. Through the cracks, freer and wild honey, laced now with something else. The sharp copper bite of blood. And beneath that, the frantic pheromones of a body drowning in pain. Open it. His voice dropped into a register that wasn't fully human, dual-toned, demonic, low enough to rattle the foundation stones beneath their feet. Dominic caught up, saw the cellar door, and felt his bladder surrender. __quote _50 __. Caspian moved. No one saw the transition. One instant he stood at the door. The next, Dominic dangled from his fist. 300 pounds of alpha hoisted off the ground by the throat, one-handed. __quote _51 ___. Claws slid from Caspian's fingertips, sinking into the flesh of Dominic's neck. Blood beaded along each puncture. __quote _5 2 ___. Caspian's whisper was worse than any roar. His violet eyes burned with something beyond fury, something holy and terrible. I will reduce your territory to ash, and I will make you chew the cinders. Give me the key. Dominic's fingers scraped uselessly at Caspian's wrist. His face turned a mottled violet. Greta has it, he rasped. Caspian released him the way a man discards something rotten. He didn't wait for Greta. Both hands closed around the steel padlock, muscle corded beneath skin. A sickening metallic shriek, and the lock tore free in his grip. He wrenched the iron door open and plunged into the black, freezing throat of the stairwell. __quote _55 ___. Gideon ordered the kitchen staff overhead. He seized a heavy flashlight from its wall mount and followed his king down into the dark. At the bottom of the stairs, past overturned crates of rotting vegetables, Caspian found her. Cora was curled on the damp dirt floor, her frail body convulsed through a forced, unguided transition, skin burning, bones shifting and snapping at agonizing intervals. She wept without sound, fingers knotted in her own hair. She looked so small, so shattered. Filthy grey rags hung from a malnourished frame like burial cloth. But the instant Caspian stepped closer, Gideon's flashlight beam cutting into that dark corner, the convulsions stopped. Cora gasped. Her body went perfectly still. The searing agony of the shift drained away, replaced by something she had never once felt in 20 years of living. Warmth, safety, both at once, both overwhelming. She uncurled slowly, lifted a dirt-streaked face. Through the blur of tears she saw him, a man of impossible stature, dressed in midnight black, staring at her as though nothing else in the universe had ever existed. Caspian dropped to his knees in the dirt. His tailored suit meant nothing. His massive hands, trembling, reached out and cupped her cheeks with a gentleness that contradicted every terrifying thing about him. The instant his skin met hers, a shockwave of electricity detonated between them. The bond sealed itself like a wound closing. "Mine," Caspian breathed. His voice broke on the word, a century of suppressed emotion fracturing through a single syllable. He gathered her tiny, fragile body into his arms, buried his face against her neck. inhaled the scent he had spent his entire existence searching for. Cora, exhausted, abused, thoroughly bewildered, let her head rest against the broad expanse of his chest. For the first time in 20 years, she felt completely, undeniably safe. Above them, standing at the top of the stairs, Dominic Blackwood looked down, and the realization hit him with the weight of a collapsing world. He had just signed his own death warrant. He had enslaved the Alpha Queen. The silence in the grand hall of the Iron Fang compound was no longer respectful. It was the suffocating, terror-stricken quiet of a graveyard. The lavish banquet sat untouched, roasted meats cooling on silver platters, wine stagnating in crystal goblets, every wolf present, from the highest-ranking enforcer to the vainest socialite, stood frozen, eyes locked on the shattered kitchen doors. When King Caspian Reed finally emerged from the corridor's shadows, the collective gasp of the room devoured whatever oxygen remained. He was not the immaculate, untouchable monarch who had arrived hours earlier. His bespoke midnight black suit jacket was gone, wrapped securely around the fragile, trembling bundle cradled in his arms. His crisp white shirt was streaked with cellar dirt, and his eyes, those famously terrifying violet irises, blazed with a lethal, unrestrained luminescence. Nestled against his broad chest was Cora, face buried in the crook of his neck, thin, bruised fingers clutching the fabric of his shirt like it was the only solid thing left in the world. To the Iron Fang pack, she was the nameless, sterling runt, the defective omega they had kicked, starved, and mocked for 8 months. To the king, she was the center of the universe. Dominic Blackwood stumbled into the hall behind them, his face the color of wet ash. He looked less like an alpha and more like a man walking toward the gallows. Caspian did not shout. He did not roar. His voice, when it finally came, was a low, melodic purr. It vibrated through the floorboards. It settled into the marrow of every wolf in that room. Quote, 57, Caspian murmured, his gaze never leaving the trembling girl cradled against his chest. Gideon had trailed them up from the dark without a sound. Now he stepped forward, one hand resting easy on the silver hilt of his blade. Quote, 58, quote, 59. Caspian's tone was soft, almost gentle. The words were not. No one leaves. Sever the communication lines. I want the airspace above this territory locked down. It is already done, sire, Gideon answered without hesitation, gesturing toward the heavily armed royal guards now flooding the grand hall's perimeter, weapons drawn, faces carved from stone. Dominic collapsed to his knees, his massive frame shook like something hollowed out. Quote 62. Caspian moved with blinding speed. He didn't set Cora down, he simply shifted his weight, and a concussive wall of pure alpha aura detonated outward. It struck Dominic like a battering ram. The Iron Fang Alpha launched backward, smashing through a heavy oak table, sending splinters and silverware shrieking across the floor. Dominic screamed. The sheer atmospheric pressure of the king's dominance crushed him flat against the stone, snapping his collarbone like a dry branch. Caspian walked toward the broken man, slow, deliberate. Cora whimpered against his neck, pressing closer, terrified by the violence radiating from the body that held her so gently. He felt her distress instantly. His aura pulled back like a tide retreating from shore. His expression softened. His fingers found her tangled hair, stroking it with impossible tenderness. Quote, 63, he whispered against her temple. Quote, 64. Then his glowing eyes returned to Dominic. The tenderness vanished. Quote, 65. Quote, 66. Dominic sobbed, thrusting a trembling, blood-slicked finger toward the kitchen staff, huddled in the far corner. Quote, 67. Quote, Greta, the vicious head of the domestic staff, let out a piercing shriek and bolted for the servants' exit. She made it 3 steps. 2 royal guards brought her down hard, slamming silver cuffs around her wrists before her knees even hit the ground. Caspian looked down at Dominic with a disgust so absolute it could freeze marrow. A true alpha takes responsibility for his territory. You point at your subordinates to explain the rot in your own house. A pause. You are a coward, Dominic Blackwood. Caspian raised his free hand, the one not holding his mate, and addressed the terrified pack. Hear the judgment of the Royal Obsidian Court. As of this moment, the Iron Fang pack is dissolved. Dominic Blackwood is stripped of his title, his lands and his wealth. He is declared rogue and will be transported to the subterranean prison at Black Gate to await execution for high treason. A wail erupted from Dominic's sister Sylvia. One sharp glare from Gideon killed it in her throat. Quote, 7-1. Caspian continued, his voice tolling like a funeral bell. Quote, 72. Quote, 73. Gideon bowed. Caspian turned his back on the wreckage of Iron Fang leadership. He looked down at Cora, tears finally spent, consciousness slipping away as her body surrendered. The interrupted transition and the flood of adrenaline had drained every last reserve she had. Quote, 74, No discussion, no negotiation. Caspian's voice carried the weight of a verdict. He lifted her from that place, carried her across the threshold of her personal hell and out into the courtyard, where cool mountain air hit his face like a benediction. Minutes later, the heavy thwack-thwack of a military-grade Sikorsky helicopter carved through the valley. Caspian boarded, with Cora locked against his chest. Royal medics reached for her. He shut them down with a look. The helicopter banked south. Below, the Iron Fang compound shrank, rooftops, walls, gates, shrinking into something small and forgettable. But nothing about this was forgettable. The immediate threat was gone. Dominic, neutralized. Yet something colder was already coiling behind Caspian's ribs. A darker, slower kind of rage. Because Dominic was only the buyer. The architects, the ones who packaged their own daughter and sold her like livestock, were still breathing comfortably in the lush forests of Oregon. The Sterlings had no idea what was coming, but they were going to learn something permanent about the cost of selling their own blood. The Royal Obsidian Citadel rose from a heavily guarded private valley deep within the San Juan Mountains near Telluride, Colorado. Modern architecture fused with ancient lichen tradition, glass, black marble, warm timber, all of it overlooking a pristine alpine lake, a fortress disguised as a cathedral. Cora woke 3 days later. She didn't open her eyes, not immediately. For 8 months, waking up had followed the same ritual. Harsh glare from a bare bulb, freezing dampness crawling up through concrete. Greta's steel-toed boot slamming into her mattress. But this morning, no dampness, no cold. She was lying on something so impossibly soft it barely felt real. Thick, downy comforters cocooned her body. And the smell. Pine-rich parchment, blooming freesia, wild honey. Intoxicating, unfamiliar, safe. She opened one eye, cautiously, the way a hunted animal checks a clearing. The room was enormous. Golden morning light poured through floor-to-ceiling windows. A fire crackled low in a massive stone hearth, popping softly against the silence. Quote, 75, Cora flinched so hard her spine cracked against the velvet headboard. She scrambled backward, yanking the covers to her chin. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird throwing itself at bars. Sitting in a leather armchair beside the bed, King Caspian. The formal suits were gone. Dark trousers, a charcoal Henley stretched across a heavily muscled frame. Shadows pooled under his violet eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. The moment he registered her panic, his hands came up slowly, palms open, empty, unarmed. "I apologize." His voice dropped to a careful, gentle octave, deliberately non-threatening. "I didn't mean to startle you. I am Caspian." Cora stared at him. Her mind was spinning, fragments surfacing through fog, the cellar, the agony of bones shifting beneath her skin, and then that sudden, overwhelming warmth when this giant of a man had pulled her from the dirt. You're the king? To the world?" A slight pause. "Yes," Caspian replied, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "To you, I am simply your mate." Cora swallowed hard. Her throat was sand. "That's impossible. I'm a defect." The words came out cracked, rehearsed, beaten into her over years. "I'm an unshifted omega. The Alpha King doesn't mate with defective runts. My sisters told me." Her voice splintered. Old poison rising to the surface, every cruel word, every deliberate humiliation calcified into belief. "They said the moon goddess cursed me." A flash of absolute fury tore across Caspian's face, the kind that made the air itself recoil. Cora flinched, but he caught it, closed his eyes, drew one long, controlled breath, wrestling the wolf beneath his skin back into silence. When those eyes opened again, the storm had passed. What remained was something worse than anger. Tenderness. The raw, aching kind that breaks you faster than any fist. Quote 85. Caspian said quietly, rising to his feet. He crossed to a silver tray on the side table, poured a glass of fresh water and carried it back. He didn't press it into her hands. Didn't insist. He simply placed it on the nightstand, close enough to reach, easy enough to refuse. Underscore, quote, 86, underscore. He paused, letting the silence hold the weight of what came next. Underscore, quote, 87, underscore. His jaw tightened. Underscore, quote, 88, underscore. Cora stared at the glass of water. Her mind clawed at the words, trying to arrange them into something that made sense. Quote, 89. Quote, 90. Caspian confirmed with a slow nod. Quote, 91. Quote, his voice dropped lower, softer, almost reverent. Quote, 92. Quote, tears burned at the edges of her vision. Every year of her life, every single day, she had been told she was nothing, a burden, a stain smeared across the proud sterling name. And now, the most powerful lichen in the world stood before her, looking at her like she was something sacred. Underscore, quote, 93, underscore. The whisper barely left her lips before a tear slid down her cheek. Caspian lowered himself to the edge of the bed, carefully, deliberately keeping distance between them, enough space that she wouldn't feel cornered, close enough that she wouldn't feel alone. He lifted his hand, and those large, warm fingers brushed the tear from her face with impossible gentleness. The mate bond crackled between them, electric, alive, dancing across their skin like static before a lightning strike. A shiver traced the full length of Cora's spine. "Because the moon goddess knew I needed a queen with a heart strong enough to survive the dark," he murmured, "and because she knew you needed a sanctuary." His gaze held hers, steady, unbreakable. "You will never scrub another floor, Cora. You will never be cold, or hungry, or frightened again. That is my vow to you." Over the next 2 weeks, the royal obsidian citadel reshaped itself around its new queen. Caspian was infinitely patient. He never pushed. He let Cora set the pace of every touch, every glance, every moment of closeness, content to simply sit beside her by the fire, read aloud in the vast cathedral of the library, or walk with her along the glassy shores of the Alpine lake. Under Dr. Croft's watchful care, and fueled by the nutrient-dense meals flowing from the royal kitchens, Cora's wasted body began to mend. Bruises faded like old ink. Her skin found a warm, luminous glow it had never known. The sharp hollows beneath her cheekbones filled out, softened. But the deepest transformation was invisible. Without the toxic air of her old pack, free from the liquid silver lacing every breath at Ironfang, the dormant predator sleeping inside her was waking up, and she was waking up furious. It happened on the night of the full moon. Caspian and Cora stood together on the wide stone balcony of their suite. Moonlight poured over the lake like molten silver. The world held its breath. Then Cora gasped, and her knees hit the ground. Pure, uncut power detonated through her veins. Not the agonizing, twisted shift she'd endured in the root cellar. Not that. This was something entirely different. This was release. Caspian stepped back immediately. His eyes blazed gold, not with alarm but with pride, with awe. He gave her space. Her bones lengthened and snapped into new architecture, seamless, fluid, as if her body had been rehearsing this moment for years. Her senses blew outward like a shockwave. Pine needles miles distant, the steady heartbeat of perimeter guards, and drowning out everything else, the overwhelming, intoxicating scent of her mate. When the shift completed, Caspian dropped to one knee, his head bowed low. What stood on that balcony was not a timber wolf. Cora had shifted into something that hadn't walked North American soil in over 3 centuries. A lichen of royal lineage, massive, luminous, her fur so white it burned the eyes like sun on fresh snow. Her gaze pulsed with a celestial silver light, ancient and unblinking. She towered over the average alpha. Power radiated from her in slow, calm waves, the kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself. The white wolf, the ultimate mark of the moon goddess's favor. Cora tilted her great head toward the peaks and released a howl, long, melodic, rolling off the mountains like a hymn of pure liberation. From the darkened interior of the suite, another shape emerged. Caspian's wolf. Midnight black, the size of a grizzly bear. A beast that made seasoned warriors lose bladder control. And this terrifying creature padded across the balcony. Submissively. He pressed his enormous head beneath her chin, nuzzling, yielding, acknowledging his queen. 2 states away, a very different scene was taking shape. In the rotting manor of the Silver Pines pack, Beatrice Sterling tore open an envelope stamped with the heavy black wax seal of the Obsidian Court. Fiona lounged on the sofa, swirling cheap champagne in a glass that had seen better decades. Underscore, underscore. Quote, underscore, 97, underscore, underscore. Fiona's patience cracked first. What does it say? We heard the Dominic Blackwood rumours. Is the king ordering our execution over the border skirmishes? Beatrice's eyes moved across the heavy parchment, slowly, and then a smirk, cold, triumphant, spreading like frost across glass. Quote, 99, she breathed. Greed sharpened every syllable. Quote, 100. Fiona shot upright. Quote, 101. Quote, 102. Beatrice waved the letter like it was irrelevant. Underscore, underscore. Quote, underscore. 103. Underscore, underscore. Crystal clinked against crystal. Laughter filled the dusty, hollow study. 2 sisters toasting a future they couldn't begin to fathom. Because the queen they were so desperate to meet was the same sister they had sold for scrap. Over the next 4 weeks, the Obsidian Citadel became a forge. Cora was no longer that broken, trembling girl dragged from her father's house. Under Caspian's fiercely protective guidance, Under the rigorous tactical training of Beta Gideon and lead warrior Penelope, she stepped into her birthright. Her white wolf was not decoration, not symbol alone. It was the physical manifestation of a dominant, ancient bloodline that had slept within the Sterling line for generations, waiting. Cora learned to harness her aura, a presence so serene on the surface, so overwhelmingly powerful beneath, that even the most battle-scarred royal guards instinctively bared their necks when she passed the training grounds. They couldn't help it. Their wolves recognized something older than rank. Caspian watched this transformation unfold with awe tangled inside possessive pride. He draped her in the world's finest, silks spun in Milan, diamonds pulled from the deep earth. But the most precious thing he gave her wasn't material. It was agency. For the first time in Cora Sterling's life, her voice mattered. She took her place at his side during council sessions, her mind razor-edged, untouched by the bloated pride that poisoned most alpha heirs. When she spoke, ancient warlords leaned forward. They nodded, not out of courtesy, out of genuine respect. But behind closed doors, Caspian was building something else entirely, a masterpiece, and its medium was vengeance. "The invitations have been received, Your Majesty," Gideon reported one evening. He stood before the massive mahogany desk in Caspian's study, spine straight, voice measured. Cora sat curled in a leather wingback chair by the fire. A leather-bound history of the Northern Pax lay open across her lap. Caspian released a chuckle, dark, hollow, entirely without humor. His violet eyes caught the firelight and threw it back like a blade. He paused. Cora's gaze lifted from the page. Something tightened behind her ribs, a flicker of anxiety at the sound of those names, her family. But the white wolf inside her moved faster than the fear. Ice flooded her veins. Calm settled over her like frost on still water. She was not the prey anymore. "Are you certain about this, Caspian?" she asked softly, setting the book aside. "A public tribunal at the coronation gala? It will cause a massive scandal across the territories." Caspian crossed the room in 3 strides. He knelt beside her chair, took her hands in his, pressed his lips to her knuckles. His gaze burned with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. "Scandal is exactly what I want, my queen." His voice dropped low, almost reverent. "They did not just abuse a pack member. They sold the Alpha Queen into slavery. If I simply send my enforcers to execute them in the woods of Oregon, they become martyrs." He tightened his grip on her fingers. "I want their reputation pulverized. I want their names erased from the high society they covet so desperately. They will be an example to every alpha on this continent." 1 week later, the royal coronation gala began. The obsidian citadel had been transformed into a spectacle that bordered on the impossible. Thousands of candles floated above the grand ballroom, suspended like captured stars. Their light spilled across black marble floors, caught the mist rising from cascading waterfalls that framed the dance floor on both sides. Alphas, betas, high-ranking dignitaries from every corner of North America. They arrived in fleets of luxury vehicles, dripping in jewels and thick with political ambition. Among them, the Sterlings. Beatrice wore a plunging emerald green gown, purchased entirely on a high-interest loan she had taken out specifically for this night. Fiona was wrapped in crimson silk, her eyes sweeping the room like a hawk scanning open ground, cataloguing the wealth of every unmated alpha within range. And behind them, Silas, frail, hollow, leaning hard on a silver-tipped cane. "Stand up straight, father," Beatrice hissed. She slapped his arm, quick, discreet, as they surrendered their coats to a liveried servant. "We are representing Silver Pines. Do not look like a beggar in front of the High Council." Fiona snatched 2 flutes of vintage champagne from a passing tray. "Did you see? The Northern Warlord's councilman Alistair is here. If I can corner him near the terraces, I might secure a courtship." "Focus, Fiona," Beatrice snapped. "We need to see the new queen first. Assess her political leanings. If she is young and naive, we can manipulate our way into the inner circle. The ballroom hummed with electric anticipation. Rumours had been circulating for weeks about the king's new mate. Some whispered she was a fierce warrior from the European covens. Others whispered she descended from the moon goddess herself. No one knew her name. No one had glimpsed her face. At the stroke of midnight, a single gong, deep, iron-heavy, rolled through the ballroom like thunder trapped indoors. The music cut dead. Every whispered conversation strangled itself mid-syllable. The air pressure changed. You could feel it on your skin, on your teeth, that suffocating, bone-deep weight of the Alpha King's aura pressing down on every chest in the room. The crowd split apart like a wound as King Caspian Reed stepped onto the grand balcony above the ballroom floor. Lethal elegance given flesh, a tailored, pitch-black military tunic, the silver crest of the obsidian crown gleaming at his chest. The raw dominance radiating off him forced every wolf below to drop their heads. Not a choice, a reflex. "Welcome." His voice struck the vaulted ceilings and returned twice as loud. No microphone, no need. For a century, the Royal Obsidian Court has lacked its second half. Tonight, the moon goddess has answered my patience. Tonight, I present to you the heart of my empire, the white lichen, your alpha queen. A gasp tore through thousands of throats at once. A white lichen, the myth standing upright. She emerged from the shadows behind Caspian like a blade drawn from its sheath. Cora stepped into the cascading light of the grand chandeliers. White silk and silver thread flowed over her frame, a custom gown that shimmered like liquid moonlight given form. A delicate crown of intertwined silver branches and diamonds sat nestled in her raven hair. But it was not the gown that commanded the room. It was her aura, her spine, steel, her chin, high, and her eyes, once wide and wet with terror, now blazed with the blinding, celestial silver light of the white lichen. Down on the polished marble floor, Silas Sterling's champagne flute slipped from his fingers. It shattered. The sharp crack echoed through the dead-silent ballroom like a gunshot. He staggered backward, one hand clawing at his own chest. Beatrice and Fiona turned to stone beside him. Blood drained from their faces until they looked like corpses propped upright. Fiona's hands shook so violently that crimson wine ran down the front of her crimson dress. Up on the balcony, King Caspian's violet eyes found the Sterling family with the lethal precision of a rifle scope. He extended his hand, led his queen down the grand sweeping staircase. As they descended, step by deliberate step, the crowd parted instinctively. It left all three Sterlings completely exposed, isolated, stranded in the dead center of that marble floor, like prisoners awaiting sentencing. Quote, _120, ___. Caspian's voice had shed every trace of welcome. What remained was a blade forged from pure ice. "I see you have recognized my mate." Silas collapsed to his knees. Tears carved paths down his weathered face. "Cora, my little girl." "Do not speak her name." Caspian snarled it, that dual-toned, demonic timbre of his alpha voice crushing Silas into a deep, agonizing bow against the marble. Beatrice, fueled by a desperation that bordered on madness, stepped forward. She forced a trembling smile onto her lips. "Your Majesty, there has been a misunderstanding. This is a joyous occasion. Our sister, the Queen, we sent her away to learn discipline. We always knew she was destined for greatness." Cora stopped at the bottom of the staircase. She unlinked her arm from Caspian's. Slowly, with the calm of someone who has rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in the dark, she walked toward her older sister. Her voice was melodic, beautiful even, and entirely devoid of warmth. Beatrice shrieked, a shaking finger thrust toward Cora. Caspian's mouth curved into something that barely qualified as a smile. Cold, predatory, the kind of expression that made seasoned warriors reconsider their life choices. He snapped his fingers. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom groaned open. 4 royal guards, armed to the teeth, hauled a figure into the light. Silver chains coiled around his body like serpents. His face was a canvas of bruises. Every shred of arrogance had been systematically beaten out of him. Dominic Blackwood, former alpha of Iron Fang, dragged across marble like a sack of grain. Fiona let out a strangled sound and shrank behind her kneeling father. Caspian's gaze locked onto the chained man like a blade finding its mark. Quote, 129, quote, he commanded, quote, 130, quote. Dominic's knees hit the floor. He refused to look at Cora. I bought her, he rasped, his voice cracked on the words like dry wood. Silas owed me a debt. Beatrice and Fiona orchestrated the deal. They signed a contract, offering their youngest sister as an indentured servant to clear their ledger. Beta Gideon stepped forward. He unrolled the heavy parchment, slowly, deliberately, so every pair of eyes in that ballroom could read it. There, at the bottom, in thick black ink, the signatures of Beatrice, Fiona, and Silas Sterling. The room erupted, not in shouts, in something worse, a low, guttural wave of revulsion. Selling a blood relative violated every principle of the Lycan Accords, not bending them, shattering them. Cora looked down at the 3 people who had turned her existence into a waking nightmare. You built your luxury on my suffering, she stated. Her silver eyes burned like twin moons caught in a furnace. You thought because I couldn't fight back, I didn't matter. A pause. Measured. Surgical. You were wrong. She turned to her father. You watched them drag me away. You let the rot in your own house consume your own child. Forgive me, Silas choked out. The words sounded hollow even in his own mouth. The judgment is mine, Cora announced. Her voice carried the absolute authority of the obsidian crown, not borrowed, not inherited, but earned through every scar and sleepless night. The Sterling name has been a poison. I strip you of your titles. Silas, Beatrice, Fiona. You are no longer alphas. You are no longer nobility. The Silver Pines pack is hereby dissolved. Beatrice collapsed. Her fingernails scraped against marble as sobs tore through her chest. No, please, we have nothing. You have exactly what you gave me, Cora replied. Ice would have sounded warmer. You are banished from the Northern Territories. You will live as rogues. If you are found within 500 meters of our borders, my guards will shoot on sight. Then she did the one thing that cut deeper than any sentence. She turned her back on them. The ultimate dismissal. She climbed the stairs and placed her hand into Caspian's waiting palm. ___143__, Gideon barked. Guards seized the weeping, shattered remnants of the Sterling family and dragged them from the ballroom. Their wails echoed off stone walls, growing fainter, thinner, until the heavy iron doors slammed shut and swallowed the sound entirely. The era of their cruelty, permanently extinguished. Caspian drew Cora close. His eyes swept over the stunned, silent crowd below. Quote, 144, he declared. His voice hit the walls like thunder finding ground. Quote, 145. The orchestra swelled into a triumphant waltz. Caspian spun Cora onto the dance floor. She rested her head against his chest, letting the steady rhythm of his heartbeat replace every memory of chains and cold floors. She was no longer a captive. She was the queen, and her reign had just begun. Cora Sterling's story burns itself into memory for one reason. It proves that the most dangerous power often sleeps inside the quietest soul. What started as a harrowing tale of betrayal and survival became something far grander, an epic of divine retribution, of love that refused to break. Korra's transformation from a discarded, brutalized Omega to the revered white Lycan Queen demolishes the classic damsel-in-distress archetype from the inside out. True royalty, her journey declares, is forged in resilience and tempered by mercy. Not just. Her sisters, blinded by vanity, poisoned by greed, engineered their own spectacular unraveling. Every scheme, every cruelty, every whispered betrayal circled back like a blade returning to the hand that threw it. Karma in the Lycan world doesn't negotiate. It doesn't delay, it devours. King Caspian waited a century, not just for a mate, for a mirror. An equal whose strength didn't bend beneath crowns or collapse under ceremony. He found that in Korra, and what she brought with her reshaped the moral bedrock of an entire society. The shadows they cast over her, every one of them, were supposed to break her, snuff her out, erase whatever small flame still flickered behind those quiet eyes. Instead, those shadows did the only thing darkness can do when it meets something truly luminous. They sharpened her light until it was blinding.